Minutes to make your introductory remarks. After that, we will begin questioning. Each member will ask questions, and we want you to answer the questions within 3 to 5 minutes. And afterwards, we will have a question and answer where you will be able to ask the board questions.
All right, very good. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you this evening, so I thank you for the opportunity to speak with the board. And I've had an outstanding day visiting schools, meeting with principals, and of course visiting with the students in the schools in Selma City Schools. So definitely has been a wonderful day. I want to start off by just sharing a little bit about my philosophy of education. It's real simple: students first. That's my belief at my core, and what that means for me is that decisions that are made need to be made with that in mind. So when we're looking at financial decisions, we need to look at how does that impact children. Human resource decisions, what impact will it have on the students that are within our charge? And the same thing goes as far as facilities, curriculum and instruction, and so forth. And within that students first philosophy, at my core, I believe that that's why we're all here, to make sure that we're providing the best educational opportunities for all the children in Selma City Schools. Just a little bit about my background. I am a veteran of the U.S. Army and joined the Army right out of high school. Grew up in poverty in Salisbury, North Carolina, a small town about 40 miles north of Charlotte. Reminds me an awful lot of Selma, in that it's a small town. From the outside looking in, appears to be rather quaint, quiet southern town, but as you drive a little further and dig a little deeper within the city, a lot of inner city problems, crime, gangs, and drugs, and so forth. But that's home. I did, again, like I said, join the Army, and that's what actually brought me to Alabama. I was stationed at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And when I got out of the Army, I did stay in Huntsville and started my educational career there. I taught English and PE in high school, then went on to teach at a middle school and served as an assistant principal at a middle school also. From there, I did have my first principalship, and one of the things that makes me a unique candidate for this position is the fact that I have experience at the elementary, middle, and high school levels as it relates to being a school principal. And that's an invaluable experience, because what that means is I understand the day-to-day operations of school at every level. Including at that pre-K level. So in terms of what Selma City Schools needs, I've seen it happen and I've done the work at every level. Some of my attributes that you might find interesting, I did work at a very large urban school district in Greensboro, North Carolina. We had over 72,000 students, and of course a lot of moving parts within that. And one of the key things that we did there was have a laser-like focus on African American males. And it was a really interesting experience to be able to challenge myself as well as the team that I led to look at our work through the lens of how does this impact our African American males. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that towards the end when I get an opportunity to share. I'm a researcher. I do love to read. I'm a bit of a geek, can be kind of nerdish, but I'm proud of that. I love to read, I love to research, I love to learn. I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. But you'll also find that I'm a genuine, down-to-earth person, and I'm extremely interested in being right here in Selma to lead Selma City Schools. And in saying that, I mean being in Selma to lead Selma City Schools, because I do think it's important as a superintendent, if we're talking about engaging the community, we have to be a part of the community, and I mean that literally. So that's something that is important to me as a leader. So I look forward to sharing more, and you've got a packet in front of you that I will walk you through as we proceed through some of the questions, but most of it I'll hit at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I'll start the questioning. What is your concept of the relationship which should exist between the superintendent and the Board of Education? And what would you do to ensure a mutually satisfactory working relationship?
All right, I do think that's a great question, and I think it's extremely vital that the board and the superintendent have a mutually respectful relationship, as well as open communication, and by that open communication, meaning it should flow both ways. I know that as a Board of Education, you are the governing body of the school district, and much respect goes to you for the work that you do to that end. But as superintendent, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations, and we have to operate out of trust. As the Board of Education, I would need for you to trust me, not only as an instructional leader, but just as a person who has children at heart and the best interest of our children at heart. And I do think that that communication has to be open and ongoing and honest. One of my favorite authors is Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And one of those dysfunctions is fear of conflict. And one thing that we can't have is fear of speaking in terms of disagreeing. We need to be able to agree and work together, but also to compromise and to talk about things that may not necessarily be in agreement with us, because we cannot operate with distrust or if there's a fear of conflict in terms of being able to speak about what's best for the children of Selma City Schools. One thing that I believe, though, is that if we do work together in terms of having that open, honest communication, I believe we'll agree more than we'll disagree, because I do think that our thoughts, our values, and our priorities will be aligned based on the work that we're doing together.
Dr. Williams, what do you consider your greatest strength for this position? What strengths and your weaknesses?
Goodness, I love that question. I would say my greatest strength is, I'm going to give you two. One is my ability to build relationships. Now, growing up, I was shy. Sometimes when I go home, some of my classmates from high school and junior high school, they're like, oh my gosh, she talks. Because growing up, I was painfully shy. And a lot of people who know me now don't believe that. But what has happened over the years, and maybe it was the Army, and maybe it was some of my leadership experiences, but I have been able to connect with people and build relationships. And that's certainly a strength of mine. And it's also caused me to understand the value of relationships. I really saw this firsthand as a principal, especially my first principalship at the elementary level. Being in a community school, small school, I started making home visits and being able to actually talk face-to-face with parents. So the idea of saying that I care about your children was very tangible for the parents because they saw that I cared and I was able to connect with them. And I do have the ability to draw commonalities and to listen to people as well as understand their perspectives. So building relationships is definitely one of my strengths. But in addition to that, my knowledge of curriculum and instruction. And as much as there are some pretty heavy management responsibilities as it relates to being a superintendent, I'm a firm believer that the superintendent has to be the lead learner in a school district. And I am that. I am a true instructional leader. And again, as I mentioned in my opening, I have worked at all levels of pre-K through 12 education. And so when I say I know curriculum and instruction, I know it because I've worked with it for quite a number of years. And I've worked with teams of some of the brightest curriculum specialists and curriculum coordinators and directors and so forth, and learned so much from them over the years in terms of what matters most in improving instructional practices and teaching and learning and the work that matters in terms of improving student outcomes. And one thing that I believe and that I know is that we cannot change outcomes until we improve instruction. And that's work that I am comfortable leading, that I enjoy leading, and that I've been successful in leading. That weakness question. That's a little more difficult. I would say right now, I have a growth mindset, so I don't really look at life in terms of weaknesses. I would say my challenge right now is that I don't live here yet, but that can certainly be easily rectified. And I do think, of course, not being in Selma now, there'll be some challenges in terms of learning the community, but I'm a quick study, and definitely passionate and dedicated and willing to commit the time necessary to learn and understand the inner workings, the nuances, the untold stories and so forth that make Selma what it is.
Given your research of Selma City Schools, what innovative strategies and approaches will you employ to increase student achievement, quality of education, facilities, and effective use of funding? What does this plan look like, and what will be the proposed outcomes for Selma City Schools?
Okay. You know that was like 12 questions, right?
You want me to repeat?
No, I'm fine. I may need you to repeat part of it before I'm done, but I'm fine. Okay, so when I think about innovation, I really think about just the foundation, just fundamental structures. And the first thing that comes to mind is, what is our instructional framework? What do we believe in terms of teaching and learning? Because before we can get to the innovative piece, we've got to get the foundation right. And so I'll give you an example. In Tuscaloosa City Schools, when I started my job there as assistant superintendent, we did not have an instructional framework. And we knew that if we were going to move forward in terms of what we expect from our teachers and our administrators, we had to have a framework that outlined that and that clearly outlined that. And so we developed our instructional framework. And if you'll look in your handout, page 19. This is our instructional framework, and it's basically what matters most in terms of teaching and learning. It's page 19 in your book. Try to find it. All right, it's our framework. It's formative assessment, literacy across content areas, standards-based instruction, culturally responsive teaching and personalized learning, behavior management, and relationships conducive to learning, along with classroom management and organization. Why was this important? Because we could not reach a point to where we were pushing forward big ideas such as standards-based instruction leading to problem-based learning or project-based learning unless we had those fundamental foundational pieces in place. Now, when you think about innovation, I would start with what are the needs of the community. And one of my questions would be in terms of workforce and post-secondary plans for our students. So another foundational piece that we would need in terms of moving forward with innovation is quality four-year planning for our high school students, but not beginning that in high school, beginning that as early as 4th or 5th grade. While I was in the schools today, I did ask some of the elementary principals if they were using the Cooter assessment. And this is a career assessment that can be used for students to determine their interests. And moving through middle school, it helps prepare students to create solid four-year plans. And then what those four-year plans can do is determine what do we need in terms of innovation. Is it more CTE classes? One of the things I'm going to talk about later is becoming a STEAM district of distinction, and that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. That's a very innovative program, and there are some distinctions that Selma City Schools could earn based on that. There are certifications and distinctions that our teachers could earn because through STEAM. So there's not any one thing that I would say in terms of innovation. My first thing would be to make sure we've got a solid foundation to work from, and then the innovations that we implement need to be based on need. Another thing that I will add is that what should guide all of that should be a solid strategic plan. Because I don't believe in creating strategic plans to solve problems. We need the strategic plan, and then we need to align our work with what we say our goals and strategies are within that strategic plan. Can you repeat any part of your question that I maybe didn't cover?
Okay, with strategies and approaches that you will employ to increase student achievement, quality of education, facilities, and effective use of funding? What does the plan look like, and what's the proposed outcomes?
Okay. One process that I've seen work and that we're using in Tuscaloosa is a data teams approach, where all of our schools have teams that have been through a data teams protocol training. And the reason we do this is so that we're actually analyzing our data to ensure that as we make instructional decisions, they are based on the actual needs of our students. And so in terms of determining that our instructional practices are sound, we look at data, and when we see that there are issues or problems, we go deeper. And in Tuscaloosa, what that means is an instructional review. And another one of your handouts in your book is on page 22. This outlines the instructional review process that I developed with Tuscaloosa City Schools. And this is an answer to how do we ensure that we have sound instructional practices. Because what we do within an instructional review is a deep review of educator effectiveness, looking specifically at standards-based instruction and culture and climate. And this is a team that spends the better part of a day in a school and stays for an entire instructional block in over half the classes, up to 75% of the classes, and gives the principal a very detailed report as a result. And for a full instructional review, it also includes a deep data analysis where we look at not just achievement data, but also attendance and student discipline. We can even look at teacher retention as part of that if that's one of the issues of concern. And then the leadership effectiveness piece is basically looking at our school leaders in terms of how well they're being an instructional leader as well as managing within their buildings. This is a process that we've set forth in Tuscaloosa to ensure that our programs and our curriculum are working. It's a way for us to analyze what's working well. It's a way for us to identify model classrooms and teachers who demonstrate strong practices that we can lift up as exemplars. And it's a way for us to check ourselves to see if there's more that we need to do in terms of professional development and supporting teachers and administrators. Dr. Williams, could you talk to us about your approach to student discipline? Absolutely. Student discipline is a tough one today because we have children who bring us so many challenges and issues that schools did not have to contend with as much 5 to 10 years ago. I'm a believer in restorative practices. And what that means is that our students deserve to be taught what we mean when we say behave properly. One thing that we find in education is if a student struggles in reading, we teach them how to read. If a student struggles in math, we teach them math. But when a student struggles with behavior, we punish them. And with restorative practices, one of the primary premises behind it is ensuring that we're actually teaching the behaviors that we expect. And then the other piece to that is based on the idea of restorative justice, is that a child is not completely ostracized from the classroom community. In other words, there are ways that child can work their way back into the community without being completely removed, as much as possible. Now, this is only possible if we as a district ensure that we have structures in place that create alternatives to suspension. Because otherwise what will happen is you'll have schools, you'll have teachers who believe that, oh gosh, I can't suspend students, or I'm not getting the support that I need in terms of student discipline. And that can create some chaos within a school and certainly some morale issues for teachers. So to counter that, as a district, we would have to really look closely at alternatives to suspension. We'd have to look at our support systems that we have in place, whether they're behavioral or social workers, partnering with community services, ensuring that we have a solid group of wraparound services to provide supports, not only for the students, but for the parents. One thing about restorative practices is that it also engages the family, because we know that oftentimes what we see in schools is something that resonates with what's happening at home. And so within a restorative practices framework, there's also some supports for families. While I was visiting schools, I did see that there are some great parent resources that are available. And one of those resources would be to help support parents in terms of their students' behavior and discipline. And creating not only structures, but plans so that students know what they're supposed to do, they know what the consequences are, but they also know how they can remain in the class or get back in the class when they do misbehave. But the main thing about that, again, is it only works if we as a district commit to ensuring that the structures are in place to provide that support for the school. When I was in North Carolina, one of our schools was doing an excellent job of restorative practices, and they had what they called a reflection room. And instead of it being an in-school suspension setting, it was set up where students had some time to write about what they did. It was connected to literacy and to talk about what they did. It didn't mean that the student wouldn't still be suspended, because if they violated code of conduct, then guess what? Their consequence was still going to be their consequence. But what it did was created students who were more reflective, and it also gave them other adults that they could talk to and to support them when they had those problems again. And within that school, each student was given an advisor so that they did have at least one trusting adult, because every child should have at least one trusting adult in a school. Now, with all that being said, that's my belief in terms of discipline. But I also know that we have to have rules, and we have to have a code of conduct. But I also think that code of conduct should be something that we review annually to ensure that it still meets the needs of our students. And we do that using data. We look at student discipline data. Do we see any trends in terms of it, our discipline problems being one specific area? And I did look at the SIR report for Selma City Schools, and when you look at disruptions and defiance and that type of thing, it happens a lot. Why is it happening? Where is it happening? When is it happening? And with whom is it happening? So really digging deeper in terms of the data that we have so that we can review our current code of conduct to make sure that it is in fact working. Another thing that I believe is that students can't learn if they're not in school. So our goal should be to have practices in place as much as possible that keep the students in school while still maintaining a safe and orderly learning environment. And that's a huge charge. That's way easier said than done, and it does take a collaborative effort and making sure that we have the right people at the table. Any changes that would be made, whether it's to the code of conduct or to any specific board policies, would need to be done in a collaborative nature. So making sure that we've got teachers at the table, making sure that we've got school administrators, guidance counselors at the table, community members, parents at the table to help ensure that the voices are being heard so that when the decisions are made,